we wanted to have this interjection in the conversation, if you may. We were supposed to have it earlier on this morning, really to place the issue of climate change in the framework of the conversation that we're having on people, peace, prosperity, partnerships, and peace. I think that as we have heard from the podium, there's different ways of bringing together this conversation on the SDGs and a decade for action. And one of the ways that we believe is critical and so urgent is really the one on climate change. We want to talk about it for three reasons. One, because we're going to have COP26 very soon, and Africa is going to have to take a position to COP26. And I think that where we are today, Africa can actually have a position that is important in COP26, because we can come together to make a few decisions that will be very important for how we go forward. I stood in front of you yesterday and said that Zimbabwe was growing at 6.8% in 2018. And when we looked at the numbers for 2019, the reason I didn't give the 2019 number yesterday was that we couldn't tell, because some estimates are that it's going to not grow, but a minus 7.5%. And the number was so huge yesterday that we thought, let's not use that number, let's wait and go back and check it. Why are we going from 6.8% to minus 7.5%, and even if it was just minus 5%? Because we have droughts. As we said yesterday, the Kariba Dam that was 1,100 megawatts of energy went down to only 100 megawatts of energy. So even as we talk about transformation, as we talk about health, as we talk about agriculture, 25% of agriculture is energy. We witness all these kids telling us what they can do with ICT, but 40% of ICT is energy. So, when you have that climate shock, all these other potential hopefuls disappear on our continent, and we cannot do anything about it. So really, I think that if there is one alarm that we also want to leave Victoria Falls with, as most of us sort of talk about Victoria Falls and the backdrop of so much water, is that we stand the risk of not being able to actually profit, benefit, and add value to this amazing resource that we have on the continent. So this is what we wanted to talk about a little bit as we put this in context. There is a sense of urgency about how Africa comes together under its leadership to tell us what we want to do and how we should be addressing climate change, and in particular water risk. So if you look at and you've had some conversations already from the podium. We've talked about the linkages between the different SDGs and how you make sure that you leave no one behind. We can put all the kids in school, but if we don't take the right environment and the right climate decisions, the kids will have nothing to do when they get out, or they will be so sick because they cannot have access to water. So I think this is the problem that we are facing. Southern Africa in particular, next slide, is particularly affected by this. And when you look at East Africa, even our agriculture, we always say, 1.9 billion people that we need to feed by 2050. Africa should be the bed that feeds everybody. But we may not be able to feed anybody if climate change actually happens to us. The climate risk in places like Uganda, and this is also the same for the four large cocoa producers, Ghana, Nigeria, and Ivory Coast, are also suffering from climate risk, which means that we may not be able to even produce, when we talk about the fact that 70% of the cocoa on the continent comes from Africa, we may not be able to do it. We haven't irrigated our soils, so we are still depending on rainfall. This means that all the cocoa production will move to Latin America, so the poverty that we are trying to eradicate will continue. And as I speak, I'm trying to show you the linkages of why climate change is so important for everything that we do and we talk about. The map that you have in front of you, we've used big data to just show you the potential pressures on temperatures in places like Uganda. But there's a huge coffee trade growing, where a lot of Uganda's GDP comes from coffee. But without pure and clear policies and water surfaces that are drying, this is what is going to happen to Uganda in the next 10 years. Next slide. We have already, of course, seen the pictures in front of you are pictures from Mozambique. This is the city center of Mozambique after Cyclone Indai. So this is, people living in water. This is what, it's not in 10 years, it's not in 5 years, this was last year. And this is Africa, this is our continent, this is a capital of one of our continents, and what they suffered. What we have estimated with the World Bank and the African Development Bank and the IMF is that up to 15% of Africa's GDP gets lost in climate change. So now you see where the 15% comes from. You're growing at 6%, you're going to be running at negative 7%. So you go down 6, you add another 7. That gives you already 13. So just in Mozambique, that number is not exaggerated. And I just want to give you a sense of what we're talking about. That is the pressure that we have in front of us as we talk about climate change. And so we do need to find some way of saying, how can we make sure that we don't lose the 15%? 15% of GDP is what we're saying is the financing gap to fill the rest of the SDGs. So we're saying that we need this financing gap, but we're losing another 15% as we go. So next time when we stand here, we'll tell you we need 30% if we don't deal with this climate imperative. So it is actually quite important. Mozambique's GDP, as you see, dropped from 6.8% to 2.5%, and this year's dropping even more before it's going to catch up. So all the gains, again, are getting lost because of climate change. Next slide. The river Zambezi, as you see, and I just gave you the example of the Kariba Dam, and of course the beautiful Victoria Falls that we have as our backdrop. It looks so abundant when you go, but again, if we don't have and we cannot manage our water resources, energy is what every private sector investor says is the #1 thing that they look for when they come to the continent. They want affordable, reliable, continuous energy. If we cannot provide that to them, then this transformation agenda does not work. So we, again, need to make sure that we can do that. A lot of our clean energy, Africa has been proud to say that most of our energy is clean because we use hydro. But if our dams are drying, we saw this in Ethiopia as well, the dams are drying up, then you cannot produce the energy that you need. That immediately makes our costs more expensive. So 30% more expensive. I think many times, many of us have stood here and said, oh, the Chinese will localize to Africa because costs are getting expensive in China. They will not come if our electricity is not reliable, it's not affordable, and half of the time we cannot even provide it or produce it because of climate change. So again, we lose on that competitiveness edge that we were talking about. So the economic cost of us focusing on what is it that Africa does for its water and for its energy, I think it's particularly important as we move to COP26. Next slide. Now, the most important thing that we would like to talk about is two things, and this is sort of the last wrapping up. We cannot go as a continent from, the water stresses that we have to full solar energy. We don't yet know how to store solar. So we have countries like Mozambique that have gas. And there is going to be a transition period where we will have to use gas as a transition energy to see how we go from, coal, and then we're standing in a coal-producing country. We would like to keep the coal in the ground, not use a lot of coal because we can do better and cleaner. And you see the reasons why we should probably stop using coal and fossil fuels. But we can't stop it tomorrow and go immediately to solar because we don't know how to do it. So I think as Africa, there is a beginning conversation that says, what do we do about gas? And we believe that as Africa, we need to argue that gas should be a transition energy. Germany has asked for 18 years to retire coal. It cannot be that Africa cannot use gas, which is much cleaner, to power its industry. And we will not have the vicissitudes of gas as we have with water, because at least gas we can produce. We know where it is. We have huge stores of gas in Mauritania, in Senegal, in Mozambique next door, I think actually here as well. And I think as we go to COP26, we need to begin to come together as a continent to say, what is Africa's position on gas? That we begin to bring the international community to allow Africa to use gas as a transition. It's cheaper, it's cleaner, it makes our women, and this is the healthcare aspect of it. Clearly, when you go and visit the beautiful Victoria Falls and you see that train and the kind of smoke that it gives, and imagine that our women cook under those circumstances every day, you begin to understand why we have such sick women on the continent. With gas, they can cook cleaner, they can cook faster, and they can use less energy. So I think one of the debates that we would leave you with and we would like to have as a conclusion of AFRSD 2020 is an agenda for COP26 on electricity, on energy, on a just transition for Africa, and how we ensure that as we bring the conversations on peace, prosperity, planet, and partnerships together, we talk with our partners to make sure that they realize what are Africa's tensions and how we can ensure that we solve them collectively. So this was the conversation that I wanted to put on the table and link it a little bit with, as we do the education and do it differently, how do we begin to tell our kids that, we need to do, first treasure the water, and secondly, the water may not exist, but we can use other resources to make sure that we continue to power this generation for the future. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
this is very timely.
And Therese, I hope that I passed your
You did. Just listen to my comment and you'll realize that yes, you did, and very well so, because this is a very good way to link some of the promises, the aspirations we have, and the expectations. We can really go back to zero if we are not mindful of the climate risks. And I think this is so very pertinent, but it's also linked to the question that was asked by the Honorable Minister of Education. What education? And do we need permission